Hello everybody, this is Refresh, and I recently went to my first Theros Beyond Death draft. This was at Emerald Knights, my usual go-to for Magic the Gathering as well as board games. And so this is everything that I drafted. The first pack had a Storm Herald in it as the rare, but it wasn't that inspiring at the moment. It seemed kind of weak for a rare, and I thought that the Hero of the Nyxborn had a little bit more promise, so I picked that first. And then the second pack came around to me, and there wasn't premium removal, but there was a Hero of the Nyxborn, so I took that again. And then the third pick, Commanding Presence, just was a really good follow-up. By the time I was on the fifth or sixth pick, which I also managed to pick up yet another Hero of the Nyxborn in that first pack, I generally realized that unless I saw something that made me switch, aggro was the place to be. So I just kept picking cards that would fit well in one of these heroic aggro decks. In the second pack, the rare was Storm's Wrath, so that's what I took. It actually turned out that 3 picks later, I think the fourth pick, there was another Storm's Wrath, but I felt like having 2 Storm's Wrath would have been a little bit too much. Other than that, I think the other standouts from the picks include the really cool looking foil Annex that I got, as well as the Entrancing Lyre. That pack was stacked, by the way, because that had an Entrancing Lyre as well as a Dreadful Apathy, as well as Erois' Blessing, so there were a lot of choices for removal there. And there is an argument for taking Erois' Blessing for a deck that uses Heroic, but the Entrancing Lyre is one of the very few answers to just about any creature that you could find, and so that was the one that I ended up picking. And in the end, this is a deck that I built. As you can see, I shaved it down from the expensive spells and just went as aggressive as possible. So I tried to keep it low on the curve line and be as fast as I can get it, and also have a little bit of benefit to the auras theme. And so the aspect of manticores are pretty important for getting the blowouts or being able to go wide and then pump the whole team with the multiple creatures that have the ability to pump the whole team if they're targeted with a spell. That is basically the idea. And then I had 16 lands, 8 plains, and 8 mountains, and off I went. My first match was against a Azorius player, and in the very first game, we started off fairly evenly, but my opponent ended up getting the advantage, blowing me out with a Starlit Mantle, getting me 2 for 1, and then I couldn't draw any more gas after that. I was just drawing lands, and my opponent had a threat that was beyond what I could handle, and so finished me off. In the second match, my opponent got mana screwed, so it wasn't really hard for me to win. He just couldn't play most of what he got. And even when he got his third land, it was the wrong color, and so he was stuck playing 1 card turn and chumping, while my team just got bigger and more aggressive. That took us to the final game, which was a pretty close one for a while, and then my board just kept growing wider and wider. And although my opponent was able to gain quite a bit of life, because I had gone so wide with tons of 1/1 tokens, when I attacked and I had multiple tricks in my hand, it ended up being difficult for my opponent to not take piles of damage on the attack. Once I got a board that I thought I could swing in with for 2 or 3 turns in a row, and even if I took some losses, I could deal quite a bit of damage. That's exactly what I did. And there were some points where I was able to blow my opponent out with some well-timed aspect of manticores, but overall, that's really all I had to do. So that finished my opponent off, and I took the first match, starting on the draw, being on the play, and then continuing on the draw. My second match was against a Dimir player, and in the very first game, I was on the play, and I just curved out pretty well and went in with the beats, and it was really difficult for my opponent to stabilize because he was playing a slightly more controlling deck, and the aggro beats won. In the second game, I took a mulligan to 6, and my opponent was on the play, and my opponent and I were fairly even up until my opponent played the Nadir Kraken, which pretty much single-handedly stopped me from getting an advantage because he would regularly pump out a new creature and either be able to chomp my big creatures or grow big and be able to block me. And at some point, my opponent became the beatdown because I was just running out of gas and my opponent was drawing it and removing my best creatures and ran away with the game with the Nadir Creakin. So that was not easy for me to come back from. In the third match, it was a pretty good match. I was on the play and we had a very good back and forth with removal and creatures and so forth, but eventually my opponent just started to flood out and I got a couple good 2-for-1s, and so eventually, like in the last game of the first match, I went really wide and my opponent didn't have enough to deal with my going wide, and so I was able to attack and finish him off. My final match was against a Izzet player, and my opening hand had 2 lands and a grip of spells. There were a few playables and the 2 and 3 mana spot, but I simply could not draw another land, and so even though my opponent took a mulligan to 6, being unable to draw any lands and continually drawing only spells that were 3 or more mana, I took a beating and saw the writing on the wall, because at one point, even if I could draw another land, my opponent just had already established too wide a board that playing a random 3-drop would not give me the capacity to catch back up. So that was a loss to Mana Screw. And then unfortunately for my opponent, on the second match, I was on the play. My opponent took a mulligan to 6, and then he got Mana Screwed on 2 lands, and the same thing happened, except this time with me on the beatdown and finishing him off before he was able to really be able to do much of anything. Our final match was a really, really close match. We traded creatures back and forth, we traded spells, and then we were at a bit of a stalemate, and I had gone wide and taken my opponent down to a pretty scary life total, and so all I needed was to draw any one of my instant speed spells or 1 or 2 more creatures, and I would have had the win locked down, but my opponent was able to draw the Storm Herald I actually passed in the first pack, and with that Storm Herald he was able to bring back 2 auras, both Eros' blessings, put them on his creatures and blow out 2 of my creatures that could block, and then fly over me and finish me off for the win. It's quite brutal to be beaten by the card that I passed in the very first pack that ended up with my opponent. And so I ended up going 2-1. For my efforts, I had got second pick of all of the physical prizes, and my pick was this playmat that you see here. And then I also got my choice of promo, and so I looked at all the promos and picked up a promo Doom Whisperer. And that was my Theros Beyond Draft experience. Let me know what you thought about the picks I made, the deck I made, and the games that I played in the comments below, as well as any stories you might have from your own Theros Beyond Draft. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button. If you'd like to see more such videos, hit subscribe. This was Refresh. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.